My name is Olena Bulygina, and I'm a senior UX consultant at Inviqa. And today I am very, very delighted to talk to Grant Broome from Dig Inclusion, and on a topic that has been particularly interesting in the last couple of years, not just to me, but I'm very sure to a lot of people in the room. And with accessibility, finally getting out of the shade and maybe stepping in the spotlight a bit more, as it should always have been. There is a variety, a plethora really of newly automated tools that promise us all lots of different things, right? From straight up full compliance to just basically removing all the headache from accessibility audits in just a couple of clicks. This all sounds extremely promising, but today we are going to talk about that in a bit more details about automated testing, what are the good sides of it, the limitations of it, and how do we all see it evolving. So welcome, Grant. Very, very happy to see you.
Oh, thanks very much. And I'm very, very happy to see you as well. And this is a topic that we talk about an awful lot, automated testing and what it can actually do, the limitations of it. But not just the limitations, but, it's how useful it can be as well. So, how we use automated testing at Dig Inclusion is to help us with our manual testing. Essentially, automated testing should be part of every accessibility tester's toolkit, because it's a very quick way of getting results, the results that you want very quickly. So, for example, it will tell you whether an image is missing an alt attribute, and that's a really useful thing to know. To test that manually takes time, so to get that with the click of a button is really, really useful. I think one of the problems that we have with automated testing is the fact that it's very often oversold. So some people can see it as a complete solution, and it's not even close, and maybe we can talk about some of the details of that. And also that even if it's not oversold, I think people can just rely on it as their only solution for testing and for accessibility, and that's really limiting. Vendors themselves say that they can only test 30 to 40% of accessibility issues with automated testing. I'd say it's lower. And some of the nuanced things about accessibility, the way that maybe a screen reader works with a browser in a certain configuration, some of those issues aren't going to be picked up by automated testing, even if under some of the circumstances they would be. So it should be part of everyone's testing techniques and toolkit, but it can't be the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. No, first and foremost, I absolutely agree with you. It is, I guess, it is something that is not being talked quite often, is that one tool rarely, as you said, rarely does everything, right? So we may need lots of specific tools to check certain aspects, like contrast checker. Technically, it is a tool that assists you with technically what could be automated testing, right? Because it does the work for you, but it also carries limitation, and of course it doesn't do one tool rarely does it all. But you touched on something that is super interesting, and for example, alt text on the images, right? So we can see the list of the missing tags or present tags, but then how do we know that the text is really equivalent to information on an image, right? I don't think that this is can be solved without manual going through each tag and then checking it out.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many discussions internally about whether an alt text is appropriate for an image as a human.
Right.
So when we can rationalize, is that really describing the image, or does it need to describe this image? Is this image already described in the text and we don't want to repeat the text in that image? And we have discussions like that, and they're fairly regular among our testing team. So to trust an algorithm to do that it just seems ridiculous, because it's just too complicated. Well, not too complicated, but it's a complicated task for a human. And the big thing in there is context. So while an algorithm can make a very, very quick decision about whether an image has an alt attribute or not. So that's the alternative text for an image in HTML code. It can make a very quick decision about whether there's one there, and it can even have maybe a bank of keywords that it thinks shouldn't be in the image. So like a string of numbers, or if it starts with the text image, it can say this is suspicious alt text or something like that. But actually making the decision, it can't do it. There's a picture that I made up with a kitten, and the alt text has kitten in one instance and great white shark in the other, and we fed both of those images into the Google accessibility tester, and it got 100% on in both cases. And that's because it just doesn't know. Not only does it not know that that kitten isn't a great white shark, even if it did, my kitten could be called great white shark. So it would not be able to know without that additional context whether that image was correct or not.
I think this is a great example, because it also reminds me of the story of maybe 3 to 4 years ago, also with the Google accessibility checker tool, where one developer was aimed at building the website that would have the perfect score in Lighthouse.
Oh yeah.
And it did, and I think it got to 100, which is of course a testament to knowledge how to almost like whisper to the machine, right? So it would be passing all the checks, but the reality of that to human experience, especially to human experience with access needs, that site was absolutely inaccessible. It was basically parsing. To a human, it was gibberish, but to a machine, it would get 100. And I think this is such a this is the most known example probably by now, but it's also such an illustrious way of showing how much every score needs to be then checked by a human and assembled and disassembled. I wanted also to ask a question on something that we touched on the beginning, and it is our bright and hopefully accessible future. And I say it very seriously, but how does AI fit in, if any? What are you seeing from your work and experience?
I think AI is what we'll be relying on much more heavily in the future. I don't think we're really close to even trying a solution yet. It's something that we're looking at. I think when we look into employee developers in the future, we'll be looking at AI as well. And I don't think it just applies to our industry. I think it applies to so many different industries. Excuse me. So I think that I think AI is, it's in every aspect of our lives. It's going to be a really important thing, and I think a lot of jobs are going to be affected by AI as well. And one of those is going to be jobs like ours, which is testing. So I think that if you're not on the AI train, for example, as a business, let's say, then you're probably going to start falling behind very quickly. So I think that every accessibility organization that's involved in testing or development should be looking at AI to assist in that. And the reason why it's so useful is that manual testing, while it's more thorough and it's more accurate, it's very time consuming. So the idea that you could get a machine to make the same kinds of decisions, but it being a machine, so they can make these decisions, thousands of times a second, that would really give us good results. But of course, AI will be very heavily dependent on what you put into it. So that aspect of AI will still depend very heavily on people like us, testing teams, to make good decisions about accessibility, relay those back to the AI so it's got a good platform to learn off, because it won't learn by itself very well. So it's only through repetition, through feedback into that machine learning system, that system is going to learn what's good and what's bad about accessibility. So there's still a lot of work to do, and that will take some time. Effectively what that means in reality is that we're going to have to test hundreds of websites. We'll probably need to collaborate with different accessibility agencies so that we can get their data in as well. So we're using a framework for testing, which we call Hugger, Hugr, and what the roadmap includes in there people opting into AI testing, where they will be able to record results and then teach the machine as they go along, and that'll help them, because that will mean that the machine can do more of their work, and it'll help us, and it'll help anybody who's interested in accessibility testing. Because once you're in that I don't know what to call it, that ecosystem, let's say, then that's going to bring a lot of value to your testing, because the machine will be doing so much for you at that point. So there'll be, I suppose that's a lot of people like us helping each other, I suppose, just buying into the idea that the more data that we have, the more useful our test results are going to be.
And there's clearly, no, I also think I agree with you. I think there is a lot of potential to augment our decision making and human decision making, and especially in the field as complex and nuanced as accessibility audits. Yeah. But also a big part of that effort has to be almost grassroots by nature. So like bottom up, really teams teaming up with other people and just making sure that together we are driving the results to where we need to be, because I don't see how a top-down, how there can be a top-down effort at all.
No, unless you're a really huge organization running this thing, and then I suppose you could do it that way. But as long as you are running lots of these tests, but organizations like that don't really exist at the moment. So it's, yeah, I think there's probably going to need to be some community collaboration on that one.
Right. This gets me to something we discussed a couple of sentences earlier, and I was thinking about the tools that are currently existing on the market, and my own biggest problem with them when I do my accessibility work is that I'm not really sure. Whenever I use something new, like I have a park of tools, but whenever I use something new or have to use something new, I am not usually sure which guidelines are checked and how. And so there's always has to be some like almost discovery effort from my side to figure out a good like product task fit in a way. And also like some check against the latest guidelines and some don't. I wouldn't say that I'm a newbie in this one. I have experience in accessibility, including the training and like several years of doing audits and user testing for accessibility. But it is confusing even for me often from time to time. What is your view on that part of automated testing?
That's an interesting one, because the other thing, of course, is that they give you different results too, right? So yeah. So you run this tool, it'll say that this passes, and you run a different tool and it says that it fails, and they don't agree with each other. So it's very difficult for someone without a background in accessibility, or even a beginner in accessibility, or even someone who's quite experienced, to know whether those results are reliable or not. And I think I think you then have to come to the conclusion that they're just not reliable. So even if you've got maybe a list of tests that software will do for you, even within those tests, they're going to come up with varying results. So you have to think, right, this is just a manual check. And you kind of flip it on its head then. So you think that, right, I'm going to have to check all of these manually. How can that tool help me with this specific issue that I'm looking at right now? So instead of thinking of it as a big picture, in that, it's going to do these for me, so I only have to do this thing, you have to just go through, images, for example. So this is, everybody understands images in accessibility. They're one of 50 AA criteria, but it's the one that everyone gets. So you've got images, for example, and to be honest with you, that's not something that we'd even run an automated tool on within our test sample. Thinking about it, our testing team would listen to those images with the screen reader. If they heard something strange, they would then go in and look at the code and see what's going on there. So the automated tool part of that probably isn't that useful. One place where maybe it is more useful is forms. So forms can be very long, they can be complicated. There's lots of ways of adding a label to a form. So you can use, without getting too technical, you can use the visible label, the one that you can see, or you can use some hidden code behind it using some white aria, and you can label it that way. So, and this can be within a bunch of code, like divs and containers, where it's very difficult to see what's going on. But an automated tool can do that really quickly, and it can tell you this form has no label at all, or this form's labeled twice. So that's the approach that I think people should take with testing, is to look at all of those criteria in an individual basis. If it's very difficult to test manually, then go and you run that through an automated tool and see what that says about it, because that can give you some insight into little bits of the code that you've missed or you can't see, or something else like that. But your original question was about, how do you know what that tool is doing? And I just think you can't. And it's not just that, even if they give you a list of things that it does, then you don't, because you don't know whether it's any good at doing those things. So you've run, maybe in your own experience, you'll have run a web page through a color contrast analyzer, or you've run it through a tool, and they won't give you the same results, because we know that the algorithms that they use or the rules that they use are different. So those rules, even though it says that it tests that thing, you're not going to get a reliable result from it. And I think it's only from doing this over and over again that you get to have a feel for what an automated tool can do well and what it can't. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also this is also my experience as well. I feel like everything I do has to be almost battle tested, or basically until I am sure in what I'm using. There's a chance I will not use like another HTML code checker second time if it doesn't give me confidence. However, one thing it does not make easier though is, this is what I see with my clients' work, is that we're finally having people who try to bake in accessibility since the inception of the project, since the first day on the project, since even before basically we signed the statement of work. And I think that this is truly and honestly exciting, because even, I don't need to tell you, right, that even 2 years ago, it felt very different. 5 years ago, it was dramatically different, right? But then it kind of becomes my responsibility as a practitioner then to sit with them and to explain that tool they maybe saw advertising in the internet will not work the way they think will work, and it still requires this manual attempt, which of course in the beginning can be daunting. Do you have any advice on that, basically how to for someone who is just starting, what would be the main 3 things about the first steps in accessibility and maybe using tools?
It's a really good question. So the question is about if I were to put it into my own context, if I was starting from scratch, or if I could advise myself in the past, what would be the things that I would say, or the advice I would give? I would say the first thing that you need is a good grounding in web development, and I didn't when I first started in web accessibility. And I had to learn. I learned through testing, so I play with the code and things like that, and that's not the best way to learn. So I would say that the first thing that you need to do is do a HTML, CSS course, JavaScript course. Just get at least the basics of the understanding of how things are built. I think that is probably where I would start, is just understanding how websites are built, how to build code, what the semantics look like. The second thing I would do is learn how to use a screen reader properly, because a screen reader will reveal so many faults in the page that aren't apparent to automated testing tools, that aren't apparent to you as a sighted user. It'll churn up a lot of stuff. So I would say the second thing then would be to learn how to use a screen reader. And then the third one is to familiarize yourself with the accessibility testing guidelines. So they are the foundational elements of accessibility testing, understanding of what you're working with, understanding things from a user perspective. And I know I've just talked about screen readers there. The other aspects of accessibility, you don't necessarily need to have any specialist software for. So keyboard testing can be done by the keyboard. The only other one, I suppose, is voice activation. So if you've got some experience with something like Dragon Naturally Speaking, then that's going to help you a lot as well, because again, you'll get some issues there that you're not going to find using any other tools. So that would be my advice. So yeah, those three pillars, I think if you get those as a foundation, you're in a good position to be an accessibility consultant, I would say.
This is amazing. Thank you. Thank you. No, they're all valuable, and I agree that we have to look at it from technical perspective, from user perspective, and also from the guidelines perspective, because even though compliance does not always equal accessible experience, but compliance is the first step to get there. And luckily, we have 20 years of guidelines to help us guide it through. This is amazing. Thank you. Right, I think we're done.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, Olena. That was great. Really nice talking to you. And yeah, speak to you again soon.